I would like to mention that most of this video's research was taken from Russel Shorto's book, The Island in the Center of the World, the epic story of Dutch Manhattan and the forgotten colony that shaped America. I highly recommend it, and I will put a link in the description for the book and its audio version. Now enjoy.
New York, the largest city in the United States and the second largest on the continent after Mexico City. The city inspires thoughts of sports, massive buildings touching the sky, and is home to some of our favorite sitcom characters. New York is over 100 years older than the founding of the country. In fact, New York had been an English colony since 1664. In its early days, most New Yorkers lived on the southern end of the island of Manhattan, which came from the Lenape name Manhattan. The Lenape were native to the mid-Atlantic region of the United States and were the first inhabitants of Manhattan. But it wasn't the English who first came into contact with the tribes in the 1660s. Rather, the Dutch had been active in New York for around 50 years before the English takeover, when Henry Hudson explored the region in 1609, after which Manhattan would see the rise of Dutch traders, followed by the construction of forts and settlements, and by the time the English renamed the colony, New Netherland had as many as 9,000 residents, with 2,500 living in the colony's capital of New Amsterdam. Some would think that the genesis of New York would begin with the English takeover, or even farther back with early Dutch settlement or the Lenape. Maybe the story of New Amsterdam starts on a different part of the globe in Europe's Amsterdam, or even the greater region of the Dutch Netherlands, but in fact the story begins at the end of the 15th century in Spain. King Charles V was a Flemish nobleman who the grandson of Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon on his maternal side. He was also the paternal grandson of Mary, Duchess of Burgundy, and Maximilian of Austria. This led to Charles inheriting massive amounts of territory throughout the European continent and Spanish America. The land of Burgundy was a mixed Germanic and Frankish cultures that encompassed the modern nations of the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and parts of France and Germany. The region's northern reaches had resisted Spanish control over Dutch nobles, encountered heavy taxation, and tensions rose between Protestant and Catholic groups. This led to the Dutch Revolt, or also known as the 80 Years' War, that lasted from 1568 to 1648. In 1580, Portugal and Spain joined together under the Iberian Union through hereditary claims. Portugal had joined Spain in the war against the revolting Dutch. By this time, Portugal had colonies and trade stations in Brazil, Africa, India, and the East Indies. Lisbon was the center of European trade as Portuguese traders brought in imports from across the globe to be distributed in the capital city. The Iberian Union put a blockade on Dutch ports, and with information about Portuguese trade routes stolen from Lisbon, the Dutch built up a navy to attack Spanish but mostly Portuguese colonies across the world. Most of the war was concentrated in Europe, but the Dutch were able to take over Portuguese influence and establish ports of their own. Soon the Dutch controlled their own ports in Malacca, India, and Ceylon, Sri Lanka, Africa, Formosa, Taiwan, and took Portuguese positions in the New World such as Guyana and the West Indies. Soon Amsterdam took over Lisbon's position as the economic center of Europe. The Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, shortened to VOC or translated to United East India Company, formed in 1602 to help govern and maintain the new Dutch colonies. The VOC was also the first joint stock company. Shorto described the company saying,
"The East India Company had exploited Asia to fabulous result. Now its new colleague would encompass the Atlantic Rim, its monopoly extending to West Africa, the Caribbean islands, and the coast of North America. It was to be a creature of war as well as trade, and its network of merchants, skippers, sailors, accountants, carpenters, armorers, and soldiers infiltrated the new sphere of interest with remarkable speed."
Like many other Europeans, the Dutch wanted to find a route through North America for easier access to their much profitable colonies in Asia. The English were also interested in the discovery of the Northwest Passageway, and hired Henry Hudson to find routes to Russia and the East Indies. Hudson failed at finding a route to Asia for the English and set sail for the Dutch instead. He made his first Dutch voyage in 1609 and decided to try a more southern route where the crew was free of the burden of ice sheets. He sailed to Nova Scotia and rode the coast to Cape Cod, where he departed to the Chesapeake Bay, and sailed north to the Delaware River, where Hudson concluded that the Delaware River was too shallow to sail up. He continued his journey north till he hit New York Harbor and sailed up what was to become the Hudson River. He believed this river may be the intercontinental waterway that led to Asia, but was only able to sail a short distance past modern-day Albany. While Hudson didn't find the passageway he was looking for, he did discover a bay and river that would be great for Dutch settlement. Hudson had traded with Mohican Indians along the river that drew the attention of Dutch merchants. Hudson voyaged the next year, making it to James Bay, but was mutinied by his crew and set adrift. Dutch eagerness grew with this discovery, and many merchants and traders petitioned for a charter to establish trade in the mid-Atlantic. A charter was granted in 1615, and merchants formed the New Netherland Company before it was replaced by the Dutch West India Company in 1621. Both the Delaware River, called the South River by the Dutch, and the Hudson River were valuable points of economic interest as trade could be carried between the Dutch and native tribes along the rivers. The first Dutch settlement in North America wasn't New Amsterdam or even along the coast. Instead, Fort Nassau was established in 1615 nearly 150 miles up the Hudson River in modern-day Albany to help protect Dutch fur traders. The fort had several issues and was abandoned only to be replaced by Fort Orange. The Dutch also wanted to protect the entrance to the Hudson, so Fort Amsterdam was constructed in 1624, Fort Good Hope in 1633, and a second Fort Nassau built in 1627, both protecting the South River or Delaware River. In the time of New Netherlands, the colony had 7 directors throughout its history. The second director of the colony from 1625 to 1626 was Willem van der Hulst, who was responsible for deciding the location and construction of Fort Amsterdam and Fort Wilhelmus. Van der Hulst was ordered to stay neutral with the local tribes, but instead encouraged trade with the Mohicans. Dutch merchants would often trade European goods for pelts with wampum. Wampum was a widely exchanged currency used by mid-Atlantic tribes. They were typically necklaces with seashell beads. Wampum became so popular among the Dutch that they even began producing their own wampum in Long Island. A conflict between the Mohawks and the Mohicans erupted, which led to Dutch assistance for the Mohicans, and soon Dutch colonists found themselves living in the middle of a war zone. Many colonists in the interior of New Netherlands moved to New Amsterdam to distance themselves from the conflict. Van der Hulst was quickly replaced by German-born Peter Minuit, who served as the third director of the colony from 1626 to 1631. Minuit is most famous for his $24 purchase of Manhattan Island from Lenape Indians. While there is some truth to this story, it is less fact than fiction. You may have heard that the concept of land ownership for the American Indians was the same as owning the air you breathe. This was made popular in Chief Seattle's 1854 speech, saying,
"How can you buy or sell the sky the warmth of the land? The idea is strange to us. If we do not own the freshness of the air and the sparkle of the water, how can you buy them from us?"
While this was true for some cultures, other North American tribes did in fact have concepts of land ownership, but it differed from the European perspective. For the Lenape, they believed this real estate contract was more of a rental agreement, and land was typically rented out in order to form alliances. Second, the island wasn't purchased for $24, but purchased with tradable goods that equaled in value to 60 guilders. Minuit made lasting impacts on Manhattan and Greater New Netherlands. He facilitated city planning, established further trading with local tribes, and expanded the population of the colony to around 300 residents in 1630. Soon, New Amsterdam became one of the most powerful trade hubs in the New World, connecting the Dutch colonies in Africa, the Caribbean, New Netherlands, and the United Provinces. Minuit was removed from his position in 1631, but it wasn't the last time New Netherlands would come into contact with Minuit. Krol, 1632 to 1633, and Twiller, 1633 to 1638, served as the directors of New Netherlands when the colony was growing at a steady rate. Twiller is known for his interactions with English settlers arriving to North America. England was in turmoil in the 1630s, which was followed by the English Civil War in the 1640s. This caused mass migration of English settlers into New England and Virginia, making the population 10 times that of New Netherlands. Twiller was forced to give up Connecticut to newly arriving English settlers from the north, while being able to push back Virginians flooding into Delaware. Twiller was replaced by Willem Kieft in 1638, when the population of New Netherlands was around 10,000 residents. 1638 was a big year in New Netherlands, not only as they received their most infamous leader of Willem Kieft, but also saw the creation of New Sweden along the Delaware River, who was led by none other than Peter Minuit. Minuit was dissatisfied with the West India Company's reason for his dismissal. At the same time, Sweden was wanting to expand into North America and could hire the experienced and disgruntled Minuit. Minuit helped establish Fort Christina in 1638 and won his way back to Sweden to pick up more colonist. Minuit's fleet was hit by a hurricane, sinking the ship he was on. Swedish influence quickly outmatched the Dutch on the South River and rendered Fort Nassau unnecessary, and it was abandoned by the West India Company in 1651. Kieft could be considered the worst director of New Netherlands, and even causing the downfall of the colony that eventually placed it in the hands of the English. He often went against the Citizen Council of New Netherlands with his autocratic form of governing. Kieft was chosen as director to help boost the colony's economy, due to its competition with the quickly expanding English threat, but only increased tensions between the Dutch and English, which was one cause that led to the Anglo-Dutch Wars. Kieft also created very hostile relations with local tribes and began demanding tribute payments. Kieft also ordered attacks on local tribes in the surrounding area, going against the decision of the Council of 12, which was a small government body made up of citizens of New Netherlands. This became known as Kieft's War, which lasted from 1643 to 1645. Several Algonquin tribes experienced Dutch-led massacres, which dwindled the positive relations New Netherlands had with tribes such as the Lenape. Kieft was replaced by Peter Stuyvesant in 1647. Stuyvesant was the last director of New Netherlands, serving from 1647 to 1664. He was considered one of the best directors of the colony, despite some of his personal flaws. Stuyvesant came into a colony devastated by Kieft, with many Dutch colonists fleeing the countryside for New Amsterdam, or even back to the Netherlands. By 1650, the colony's population was around 4,000 residents. Stuyvesant saw New Amsterdam in its most exciting time in history, with the colony seeing many changes in the 1650s. New Amsterdam was one of the most diverse cities on Earth, which isn't too different from modern-day New York's diverse populace.
Its capital, New Amsterdam, was a tiny collection of rough buildings perched on the edge of a limitless wilderness. But its muddy lanes and waterfront were prowled by a babel of peoples: Norwegians, Germans, Italians, Jews, Africans, slaves and free, Walloons, Bohemians, Mansis, Montauks, Mohawks, and many others.
In fact, New Amsterdam was the home to the first Jewish community in North America, who were almost blocked from the city due to Stuyvesant's anti-Semitic ways. He also drew issues with Quakers, Lutherans, and Catholics. The city began expanding past Manhattan along the Hudson River. One example is a lawyer named Adriaen van der Donck, who gave a loan to Kieft in exchange for a tract of land. Van der Donck hired tenants to develop the land, and even built a watermill, which was one of many popping up in the colony. Van der Donck's plot was so plentiful he received the title of Jonkheer, a Dutch term referring to a landowner or noble, which gives the area its modern name of Yonkers. But during Stuyvesant's directory of the colony, it saw mass improvements such as a canal, a wall surrounding the city, which was where Wall Street now resides, and a ferry that connected New Jersey and Manhattan. Van der Donck and other New Netherlanders drew issues with Stuyvesant, which led to the colony to petition to leave the West India Company and to be under the jurisdiction of the Dutch with a self-governing body in 1652. While this decision was approved, it was resent at the start of the Anglo-Dutch War. New Amsterdam was made the capital of the colony in 1625, with the city receiving its municipality rights in 1653. Beverwyck, where Fort Orange is located, was the second city in the colony. Stuyvesant established this as a trade hub for the beaver trade, hence the name Beverwyck, and it had 1,000 residents by 1660. It was given the same municipal rights as New Amsterdam and eventually became the city of Albany, and Haarlem followed too. Two of major issues Stuyvesant dealt with in his arrival was the encroachment of Swedish and English settlers, along with hostile tribes who became an issue during Kieft's time. While Twiller had been able to push back English coming up north from Virginia, English from the north were quickly expanding towards New Netherlands. The English colonists waged a war in Connecticut against the Pequots from 1636 to 1638, essentially giving New England full control of Connecticut, and English settlement expanded into Long Island by the 1640s. Stuyvesant traveled to Hartford in 1650 and established the Treaty of Hartford, with the English colony defining the border between Connecticut and New Netherlands, along with dividing Long Island between English and Dutch control. Now Stuyvesant had to focus his attention on the expanding Swedes to the south. Even after Minuit's death, the colony still served as an important trading hub for the Swedes, and they covered territory in New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and small parts of Maryland. The colony established Fort Christina in 1638 and captured the Dutch fort of Casimir in 1651. In order to secure the South River or Delaware River, Stuyvesant sailed into the Delaware Bay in 1655 and recaptured Fort Casimir, which had been renamed Fort Trinity by the Swedes, and then captured Fort Christina, which added the territory of New Sweden into New Netherlands. Not all conflicts were with other European powers, but also took place between local tribes. While Stuyvesant was conquering New Sweden, the Swedes, trading partners of the Susquehannock, were discontent with the actions of Stuyvesant. Meanwhile, local tribes came into New Amsterdam and raided the city along with other Dutch settlements. This became known as the Peach War due to the belief that it started after a Dutchman killed a Munsee woman over a peach. But a Susquehannock chief was cited at the raids, leading modern historians to believe it resulted from the Dutch conquest of New Sweden. The Peach War lasted for about a month, and Munsee attacked settlements in Staten Island and Pavonia, Jersey City. Donck was also a victim of these raids. Stuyvesant avoided military action and instead negotiated for the release of colonial hostages. Stuyvesant also led military actions against another faction of the Lenape known as the Esopus tribe, becoming the Esopus Wars. This was two separate conflicts occurring in the northern region of New Netherlands, when Dutch colonists attacked a Esopus village. Small conflicts occurred, but peace was made in 1660. But the Esopus tribe attacked Dutch settlements such as Wiltwijck, modern-day Kingston, and Nieuw-Dorp, modern-day Hurley. But Dutch reinforcements backed by Mohawk warriors defeated the Esopus in 1663. Even though Stuyvesant worked out a treaty with New England, tensions between the Dutch and English governments were at an all-time high, resulting in the First Anglo-Dutch War from 1652 to 1654. Both sides experienced major losses, but England won the war, which resulted in Dutch traders being banned from English ports. And in 1664, 4 English frigates sailed into New Amsterdam's harbor, and the city was handed over by Stuyvesant to avoid conflict. This was followed by the Second Anglo-Dutch War from 1665 to 1667, and resulted in a Dutch victory. The Dutch gained colonies from England in the Caribbean, Africa, and the East Indies, but the English were allowed to keep control of New Netherlands, which kept out any Dutch influence in North America. New Amsterdam and New Netherlands' name was changed to New York in 1665, named after James II, Duke of York. In the Third Anglo-Dutch War, 1672 to 1674, the Dutch recaptured the city in 1673, renaming it City of New Orange, but this only lasted until the end of the war, when it was ceded back to the English victors. English colonists flooded New York, bringing Anglicization to the newly incorporated colony, but Dutch influence continued to impact the city. The free trade ideas founded in New Amsterdam still fueled the city after its English takeover, which can be seen in New York's massive role in international economics and its creation of the stock exchange in 1792 on Wall Street. By the second half of the 18th century, New York was one of the biggest cities in the English colonies, and the 1790 census shows New York was the largest city in the young country. New Amsterdam's influence is not only a major part of New York's identity, but has had massive impacts on American culture. New Amsterdam's bakeries were famous for their koekje desserts, meaning little cakes, which brought the term cookie to America. The cabbage salad called koesla was popular among the colony's residences, leading to the popularization of coleslaw. Knickerbocker pants were also fashionable among the Dutch, giving its name to the New York Knicks. President Van Buren made famous the term of OK, which came from his nickname and birthplace of the Dutch settlement Old Kinderhook, And on Monday morning, you'll probably be taking orders from someone you call boss, taken from the Dutch term baas, meaning master. Much of New York's locations and surrounding areas still have Dutch influence in their names. This includes Brooklyn, Bronx named after the Dutch landowner Jonas Bronck, Breedeweg, Broadway, Boswijk, Bushwick, Koningineiland, meaning Rabbit Island became Coney Island, Greenwijk, Greenwich Village, Harlem, Longa Island, Long Island, Staten Island, Staten Island, named after the Dutch parliament known as the States General, and as mentioned before, Jonkers, Yonkers. While the Dutch only controlled their New World colony for about 50 years, this small part of New York's history has had deep and lasting impacts on American culture and way of life.